Do you know when you just want to live your life in peace without being bothered by anyone? Well, apparently that's impossible when you have a neighbor who wakes up every day determined to turn any banal situation into a police case. It was a quiet afternoon. I'd just come back from the mall, where I'd bought my Halloween costume. It wasn't just any costume, it was the costume. A hyper-realistic zombie costume with torn clothes, fake bloodstains, and a mask that would make even a Hollywood makeup artist clap. After so long without celebrating properly, I wanted something that would stand out at the weekend party. I got home, parked, and threw the bags in the trunk. As I was in no hurry, I spent a few minutes on my cell phone, laughing at memes and answering messages. Nothing suspicious, nothing to justify what happened next. But, of course, there's always someone with nothing to do and too much time on their hands. That's when I felt a burning look on the side of my face. I looked over, and there she was, my number one snooping neighbor, standing on the sidewalk with that posture of someone who thinks she's the sheriff of the neighborhood. Normally, I'd just ignore her and get on with my day. But there was something about the way she stared at me that made me uncomfortable. She wasn't just looking, she was analyzing, as if she were putting together pieces of an imaginary puzzle and coming to a ridiculously absurd conclusion. So far, so good. I was used to her weirdness, only this time she went too far. Really far. Out of nowhere, the woman turned and ran into the house. And I mean really ran, like a horror movie character running from a killer. She disappeared through the door, and for a moment, I thought she had finally given up watching me. Big mistake. 3 minutes later, I'm about to enter the house when I hear sirens, police sirens, several of them. The noise got louder, closer, and before I could understand, 3 cars pull up right in front of me, lights flashing, tires squealing on the asphalt. Police officers quickly get out, some with their hands in their holsters, others with their guns already pointed at the ground. What about me? All I could think was, what the hell is going on here? The answer came when one of the officers walked towards me with a serious expression, as if he were about to solve a heinous crime. "We've received a report of a possible murder," he said bluntly, and that's how my normal day turned into a bizarre episode of CSI My Neighborhood Has Crazies. If there was one thing I never thought would happen to me, it was standing outside my house, surrounded by police cars, and ready to throw me to the ground at any moment. But look, another item crossed off my list of absurd things that only happened to me. The policeman in front of me spoke with the firm intonation of someone who had seen it all before. But I doubt he's ever caught a case like this. "We received a report of a possible homicide," he repeated, because I still looked like I'd been slapped in the face. "Murder? What do you mean, murder?" I stood there, blinking, trying to understand what he was saying. Was he really talking to me? Perhaps I had left my body and become a spectator in a movie about someone else's tragedy. But no, it was me. Then she reappeared, the neighborhood heroine, the world champion of the intrusion Olympics. Karen came out of her house with a look of triumph, holding her cell phone in her hand as if it were a war trophy. "He did it! I saw the whole thing!" she shouted, pointing at me as if I were a psychopath on the loose. "I saw him hiding the body in the trunk." The urge to laugh almost overcame my panic, but the problem was that the police weren't laughing. Me? A murderer? I looked at the main policeman's face, expecting some logical reaction like a laugh or a, "Ma'am, please stop this clowning around." But no, the man simply looked at me seriously and did what any policeman would do in such a situation. "Sir, raise your hands and step away from the vehicle." Holy shit. The will to argue died right then and there, because the way things were going, any wrong word could earn me an unpleasant encounter with the asphalt. So I obeyed. I raised my hands, took 2 steps to the side, and all I could think was, damn, I'm going to be arrested for a crime that never happened. That's what you get for living near a crazy person. The police moved forward in formation, as if they were about to discover the hideout of the city's biggest serial killer. One of them opened the trunk at once, ready for the most shocking crime scene of the century. And that's when the silence came, that strange pause. Those 3 seconds of pure collective vacuum. The policeman tilted his head. His partner moved closer to get a better look. Another rubbed his face, as if reviewing the decisions that had led him to that moment in his life. Because inside the trunk, instead of a corpse, what they found was a Halloween costume, a hyper-realistic zombie, a costume made of dirty, torn fabric, with fake blood dripping through the cloths. The detailed mask rested next to it, looking at them with that macabre countenance, and I swear I almost saw one of the policemen suppress a laugh. Karen, on the other hand, didn't quite accept reality. "Is that it? Is that what was in the trunk?" she shouted, as if she was seeing a mistake in the movie script she'd written in her head. "Ma'am," began the policeman, taking a deep breath, trying to keep his patience, "this is clearly a fantasy. But it seems real. Aren't you going to do anything?" I couldn't stand it. After all this, I finally spoke up. "Look, if I'm a murderer, I'm terrible at it, right? Because hiding a body and then standing in the car, fiddling with your cell phone in front of everyone, doesn't seem very smart." The policeman let out a long sigh, in the way that only those who deal with absurdities on a daily basis can do. He turned to the woman and said, "Ma'am, calling the police on a false report is a crime." And that's when Karen's face of victory disappeared. But that wasn't the end of the story. I wanted to say that after the trunk scene, the police left, my neighbor apologized, and my life went back to normal. But of course, I didn't. Because these people don't know how to lose. The policeman closed the trunk with a tired sigh and looked at Karen with the expression of someone who doesn't earn enough to deal with this kind of idiocy. "Madam, your complaint was completely unfounded." She, on the other hand, didn't want to accept it. "No, no, no. I saw him hiding something. That blood there. It can't just be paint. If you've ever seen someone sink into a hole and keep digging, you know exactly what was going on there." She could simply admit her mistake, but she preferred to double her bet. "We can test this right now if you like," said the policeman, taking out one of those kits that detect real blood. And then Karen realized that she had gotten herself into trouble. She hesitated for a second, looked away, bit her lip, as if she was weighing up her options. The right option? To stay put. The option she chose? Shitting everything even more. "It doesn't matter," she shouted, crossing her arms. "Even if it's fake, he could still be hiding something. Search his house. That's it." Now she wanted them to break into my house. The policeman rolled his eyes in a way that practically screamed, "My God, why didn't I choose another job?" "Ma'am, we don't have any evidence of a crime here." But Karen couldn't accept that, because, in her mind, if she was wrong, it meant that she wasn't the neighborhood hero. And that, my friends, was unacceptable. "But he always acts suspiciously, always arriving late, walking strangely. He must be hiding something, I'm sure of it." Dramatic pause. The policeman looked at me, as if to ask, "Has this woman always been like this? Or is it just today?" And that's when I had an epiphany. I wasn't her first victim. I remembered when the old neighbors moved in out of the blue, how they'd told me that someone was always calling the police for anything stupid. But now, for the first time, she had crossed the line, and the policeman knew it too. "Ma'am, if you keep insisting on this, you're going to be the one in trouble." It was the first time all day that she had been quiet, but not for long. "I'm just trying to protect the neighborhood," she tried to justify herself. "Protecting the neighborhood from a Halloween costume?" I snapped, "because I'm not ironclad." The policeman gave me a, "Please don't make it difficult" look, but it was too late. Karen glared at me. If looks could kill, I'd have been carried off to a real burial. But before she could shout anything else, a second policeman, who was checking her records on the system, approached the chief and whispered something in his ear. The chief arched his eyebrows. He slowly turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he began, with a calm that gave me goosebumps, "how many reports have you made in the last 6 months?" And it was at that moment that I knew her house had fallen down. If there's one thing everyone learns early in life, It's that if you're too much trouble, one day your patience runs out. And at that moment, right in front of my house, the police's patience had run out with the most insufferable woman in the neighborhood. The policeman who was checking her records finished whispering something to his boss, and I saw a discreet gotcha smile appear on his face. He crossed his arms and looked right into Karen's eyes. "Ma'am, you've made 13 reports to 911 in the last 6 months. I had to stop myself from dropping my jaw." 13? She'd called the police 13 times? I looked around and noticed that some of the neighbors had started coming out of their houses, curious about what was going on. Little by little, the audience for the big show was growing. And Karen? Well, she didn't like it at all. "I was just being a concerned citizen," she said, her voice getting louder. The policeman shook his head. "Let's see." He took out a notebook and started listing. In February, the lady called to say that an Amazon delivery man looked suspicious because he was carrying a large box. In March, she called because she thought a neighbor was dealing drugs, but he was only unloading bags of garden soil. In April, he said that there was an unknown car prowling the street, which was his neighbor's own newly purchased car. I was already dying inside, holding back my laughter. It was just embarrassment after embarrassment. Karen, on the other hand, was turning red, very red. "These are legitimate concerns." The policeman ignored her and continued. "May, the lady called to say that there was a strange man in black clothes lurking around houses. It was a substitute letter carrier." June, "Oh, that's a good one." The lady said that a wild animal was wandering around the neighborhood. It was a golden retriever. I swear I almost fell over laughing. The other neighbors started whispering among themselves, and I realized that the tide was turning. People had finally had enough of her. The icing on the cake came when the policeman turned to his colleague and said, "Well, I think we have enough elements to constitute misuse of the emergency service and disturbance of public order." That was the first time I saw Karen turn pale. "What?" "Ah, my dear, if you call the police for any nonsense, one day the police will call you." The policeman put his notebook away and sighed. "Ma'am, you need to understand that calling the police for no real reason has consequences. Our time and resources are for real situations, not to solve your paranoia." I just wanted to help," she still tried to insist. "Then help by stopping calling us." The neighborhood, now gathered on the sidewalk, erupted in whispers and disapproving looks. Some people clearly knew these stories. Others were hearing them for the first time and seemed shocked. And it was at that moment that someone said what everyone was thinking. I knew she was crazy, but not that crazy. I didn't see exactly who said it, but I saw that Karen heard very well. She looked around and realized that, this time, no one was on her side. And just like a house of cards, her facade crumbled. For years, she had done whatever she wanted, given hell to whomever she wanted, and gotten away with it. But now she was completely alone. The police have given their final verdict. We're going to record this formally and forward a report to the neighborhood administration. Depending on their decision, you could be fined or even removed from the community. I wish I could have filmed her face at that moment, because there, in that instant, Karen finally understood. She had planted chaos. Now she was going to reap the consequences. She tried to protest, but no one else gave a damn. Not the police, not the neighbors, not me. The circus was closed, and the main clown had no audience. After a few more minutes of pointless arguing, the policemen decided they had wasted enough time and left. I stood there, watching the neighbors disperse, some exchanging complicit glances with me, others just shaking their heads in disgust at Karen. When I was finally alone, I looked at my car, at the trunk, at the zombie costume, still there, harmless, but responsible for everything. And I thought, well, at least that was the best purchase I've ever made. If you liked this true story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.